Hello, I'm Dan Moyane. Now, 20 November is World Children's Day. UNICEF marks this occasion as a day of action for children by children. In 1959, the United Nations General Assembly adopted the Declaration of the Rights of the Child on the 20th of November. One of these rights, of course, is education. Sadly, the COVID-19 crisis has resulted in a child rights crisis throughout the world. On this World Children's Day, UNICEF is urging countries to ensure that all children can continue to learn. Educators and educationists across the world are unanimous that children must start learning at an early age. In this regard, we cannot overemphasize the crucial role of early childhood development, that's ECD. In this hour, we'll discuss the challenges faced by the ECD sector in our country, the current status, the impact of COVID-19, and what needs to be done to improve the situation. I'll be joined by ECD specialist Marie-Louise Samuels, who is also the retired director of ECD in the Department of Basic Education, the CEO of NGO Nali'Bali, Ms. Yandiswa Xhakaza, and the CEO of the HCI Foundation, Mr. Jamala Safari. Let me begin with you first, Ms. Xhakaza, here in the studio with us in Johannesburg. Has it been a very tough year for NGOs like yourselves, considering coronavirus?
Thank you so much for having me. It has been an incredibly tough year, particularly for NGOs. And I understand that it's been tough for even commercial businesses, but more so for NGOs. You'd remember that, NGOs are assistants to government. You know, we get to do the work that government is supposed to do, and sort of infiltrate ourselves into communities that government often cannot reach. And so when COVID hit, it really did mean that some NGOs could no longer continue doing the work that they do, which had a direct impact on the beneficiaries that we seek to assist.
Yeah, and the beneficiaries, in this case being your children that you work with, could not move and benefit from your program. So I can imagine the impact on them was even far worse than we can imagine.
Dire. It's a horrible state, because a lot of NGOs are centers where children can walk to, go to for assistance, for meals, for homework, for this, for that, and the other. And with lockdown, it did mean that these children are now stuck at home and cannot access this assistance that is there for them.
Yeah, Ms. Samuels, let me bring you in here. You've been an ECD practitioner, a specialist in this sector for years. You're now retired as a director of ECD in the Department of Basic Education. Just your assessment of how bad have things been, the impact of COVID-19 on ECD programs.
Thank you, Dan, and thanks for the opportunity of, sharing just a little bit. I think the World Children's Day for this year, UNICEF is focusing on reimagining a better future for every child. And so if we think about a better future for every child, then, looking at what has happened to children during this past couple of months, we really see the effects on children. Now, I think that suggesting that, we would be prepared for what we were faced with since January this year, I think is an understatement. Nobody was prepared for what it is that we have encountered. And early childhood development is and has always been considered to be the foundation of learning. And it contributes in a significant way to positive outcomes, both in the school life as well as in later life for young people and, as they grow older. And so it is important for us to think about the impact on the young child whenever we're thinking about what it is that we need to do. And so, in education, one of the points made by UNICEF in terms of their 6-point plan is that young children and everybody should have access to the digital world. And COVID-19 has really shown us the divide that we have in the country, not only in terms of those that have money or access, but also those that don't have, and particularly those that don't have access to the kind of resources that were required. Children were in their homes, they were with their parents who were trying to work from home. Some parents were finding it difficult emotionally to deal with all of this, and the child was the beneficiary of that. And I think that, looking at reimagining the future for every child in the country, we have to make sure that every child has access to high quality education and opportunity.
Yeah, we're going to have to discuss that later on. How do we do that? Mr. Safari, let me bring you in here as the HCI Foundation. One of the areas that the foundation supports is education across all levels, including ECD. Just a first question to you. Did you experience, especially this year, under the coronavirus pandemic, an increase in cries for help by the ECD sector?
Thank you, Dan, for having me. Yes, I think during the coronavirus and during the lockdown, I think really we saw the increase actually in need for ECD sector. You'll have to understand, actually, the infrastructure often are not there, and we usually have organizations that will have to go into communities to support communities, to provide stimulation where needed. You have to remember that some of the children themselves, they must go to this ECD center, and sometimes that's the only place where they can get actually that nutritious meal per day. And this did not happen. So ultimately what happened, what we saw is that now we had children who couldn't eat, we had children who couldn't actually get the stimulation that they need in order to grow, in order to develop. And the organizations that support these children as well were under a lot of pressure because suddenly, there was not enough resources, there was not enough funding, and as we know it, and at the same time as well, how do you adapt the curriculum so that every child who participates in your program can be able to continue receiving the necessary stimulation from home? So ultimately what we saw is that there was an increased need for support, but there was not adequate support provided to the children, provided to the families, provided to the practitioners. And really that was one glaring thing that we saw during this difficult time.
Are we out of the woods? Yes, Ms. Xhakaza? Is your sector out of the woods? I mean, we are under level 1 now of lockdown. We are told there's progress in getting a vaccine, but we don't have it yet. But globally, we see spikes like in the United States of the coronavirus pandemic. Our own president just the other day appealing to us to continue to behave. Is your sector, you think, out of the woods yet, or
Not
still
yet.
in trouble?
No, definitely not out of the woods yet. I suppose we also have to take into consideration the impact, and sort of the legacy that will still live with us post, things getting slightly better and restrictions getting relaxed. So we're still dealing with the effects of coronavirus, and we still need to social distance, and we still have ECD centers that are still closed, primarily because some of them could not get back up again.
Yeah, so the current status is a dire one,
It is.
if I may say so. Are you getting enough support from organizations other than your likes of HCI Foundation in terms of donors or stuff like that? And what is your NGO looking for from government?
So it's been tough in the sense that if we look at foundations, corporate foundations, right? Most of them have also had to take a knock during
because there was not much economic activity.
Exactly.
And they need that 1% of net profit after tax for their CSI program.
That's it. So you see the ripple effect. So if corporates are hard hit, we are hard hit. And then the children are hard hit. And then the country's hard. So there is an impact across the board in the entire value chain. But we also have government, which we would have hoped to see step up a lot more in terms of assistance, particularly when it comes to the early childhood development sector. Just just everything that happened around it during lockdown, even now that we are on level 1, and how seamless or not so seamless that process was.
Yeah, and there has been a change in government, Ms. Samuels, in terms of ECD. I'm not so sure as I stand here now whether ECD is with social development or with basic education, but during your time, it was in basic education. In your view, from your experience over these years, do you think government is doing the right things to support the ECD sector?
Dan, that is a difficult question for me to answer. I believe that early childhood development has been considered to be, a priority within government, and we find expression in most of the State of the Nation addresses, etc. The big issue for us in the country is that it needs to move from just being on the agenda and being identified as a priority to becoming part of what it is that gets reflected in the budget of the country. And so whether early childhood development and the responsibility for early childhood development is located with the Department of Social Development or the Department of Education, there is much more investment that is required in order for us to provide this great opportunity for children in the country. As we sit here today, early childhood development is still the primary responsibility of the Department of Social Development. However, early childhood development has always been seen as a service that requires the Department of Health, it requires the Department of Home Affairs, it requires the Department of Education, Social Development. And so it needs to be an integrated service. The Department of Social Development at the moment is managing the integration of these services. And whether the Department of Social Development has the responsibility or education, this management of the integrated service delivery that we require will still continue, and different departments are still required to do what they need to do. So, for example, if you are needing to have your child registered, you don't go to the Department of Social Development for that or Education. You have to go to the Department of Home Affairs. And likewise, the Health Department and the hospitals and the clinics are available and accessible for young children to be immunized, etc. And so all of those different services have to come under the umbrella of a department that can take responsibility for the coordination and the leadership required.
Yeah,
and the Department of Social Development is still there.
Yeah, it's still there, but it's a multi-kind of pronged approach because of the various touch points you are mentioning. I mean, the issue of nutrition comes into place, your feeding schemes come into place. Now, Mr. Safari, from the private sector side, you lead the HCI Foundation, which is a social investment arm, the corporate social investment arm of HCI, the holding company of, among other companies, this very channel, eNCA. Did you find it harder to raise the money you needed for your programs? Because on the website, you say about early childhood development, I'm going to read this, it's an excerpt from your website, the HCI Foundation website, under your programs, under education. We support quality early childhood development programs which prepare young children for school and help to improve their lives and those of their families. I put it to you that to support quality programs, you need money. Did you get enough this year?
Dan, I think for us as a foundation, of course, we don't rely on public funding. We don't rely on the public to fund the foundation for the program that we run. Of course, we did receive some funding. We did raise some money for the food relief campaign with eMedia, and that was actually a separate initiative. But for our own initiative, the foundation, HCI Foundation initiative, we fund ourselves. We've got our own investment, so we get dividend from our own investment, and that's what we invest in the programs that we support. But I want just to go beyond just HCI Foundation and say, well, the sector need a lot of funding. I think we know at the country we invest a lot in education. Yes, that's right. But how much really goes into ECD, into early childhood development? It's very small. And if we want to see the country as a whole going forward, we want to see prosperity, we want to see inclusive growth, where we must start is actually at the foundation phase, at early childhood development. That's where we must start. We know whatever that we can try to fix it at high school level, at university level, that's too late. We can't fix things when they're already broken. We have to start when those young minds want to develop, want to grow early on. And that's where I want to call corporate really to continue to invest in this space. As a foundation, we are focused, we are determined to continue to, we are determined and committed to continue to support this space, but we want to see more corporate funding coming into this space. And more importantly, we want to see government coming on board, because ultimately, as corporate, as foundation, we can only support the work that government is doing. And what we want to see government doing, firstly, is to make registration of early childhood development centers, those ECD centers, easy. Make it easy. Make it so easy that all this ECD center in your rural area, in your township, in your those impoverished community can have an opportunity actually to start receiving, subsidies from DSD. That's where we have to start, because ultimately we can only come to support the work that government is doing, and this space need as much support as we can, as much funding as we can, and not only government and the corporate and private sector, but even communities themselves. I mean, we have to adopt those ECD centers in our own communities, support them where we can, donate where we can, and help as much as we can, because that, if you want to see a prosperous nation, that's where we have to start, at an early childhood development level.
Mr. Safari, very passionate there. I want to focus a little bit in the next segment when we continue our discussion shortly on that word quality at different levels. The quality of the centers that we have currently in our country. We know that this sector is highly unregulated and largely informal. We've seen some horror stories where children are beaten up in some centers. What do we need to do to ensure the quality of those centers? Yes, they need to be registered. And what about the quality of the people who run them and who teach our children? We'll continue shortly in this hour with our discussion on early childhood development and its impact on the growth of our children on this World Children's Day, 20 November.